Ready to sign. The security deal between Ukraine and the US is finished. Infrastructure crisis. Russian strategic bases forced onto emergency generators as domestic systems fail. Mass production shift. Russia targets serial manufacturing of Oreshnik ballistic missiles in 2026. At a press conference in Vilnius, Zelenskyy stated that the bilateral document with the US regarding security guarantees for Ukraine is 100% ready. The Ukrainian side is waiting for notification from partners regarding the date and place for the signing of the document. Afterward, the agreement must undergo ratification by the US Congress and the Ukrainian Parliament.
Specific security guarantees for Ukraine provide the possibility of a specific end date for the war. This concerns both the war in Ukraine and the prevention of a potential war in Europe, as these will be security guarantees for Ukraine, which is part of the future European Union. For us, security guarantees are, first and foremost, bilateral security guarantees with the United States of America. The document is 100% ready. We are waiting for our partner's readiness, as well as the date and location for when we will sign it.
During negotiations in Abu Dhabi, delegations from Ukraine and the United States discussed the possibility of deploying neutral peacekeeping forces in the occupied part of the Donetsk region, according to the New York Times. According to the publication, American and Ukrainian diplomats considered the option of deploying a peacekeeping contingent from neutral countries in Donbas as an alternative to NATO forces, whose presence the Kremlin resolutely opposes. As a reminder, the Russian delegation has taken a hardline stance regarding the Donetsk region, insisting on the complete withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the region. Ukraine will not give up its territory to Russia under any circumstances. President Zelenskyy stated this during a press conference in Vilnius. According to the president of Ukraine, the U.S. is currently trying to find a compromise. To this end, meetings are being held in a trilateral format.
Our position on our territory and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which must be respected, everyone knows our position. We are fighting for our state, for what is ours. We are not fighting on the territory of a foreign country, so what questions could there be for us? Yes, these are two fundamentally different positions, the Ukrainian and the Russian ones. The Americans are trying to find a compromise. We are open to communicating in a trilateral format.
The Coalition of the Willing is changing its strategy following the negotiations in the United Arab Emirates. This was reported by Alice Rufo, the minister delegate to the Minister of the Armed Forces of France. As early as next week, the Coalition of the Willing will revise its plans for ensuring security in Ukraine. It is known that the Allies' decisions will depend on the results of the trilateral negotiations in Abu Dhabi. Their continuation may take place on February 1st. Russia currently possesses no more than 3 to 4 Oreshnik missiles in its arsenal. However, according to Oleg Lahovsky, first deputy head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, Moscow aims to launch serial production in 2026, with a target of manufacturing 5 or more units per year. In an interview with Ukrinform, Lahovsky emphasized that the Oreshnik serves primarily as a psychological weapon. He characterized the system as a tool of intimidation directed at Ukraine's European partners. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has stated that Russia is actively utilizing Belarusian territory to launch attacks against Ukraine and to blackmail Europe. Specifically, Moscow is deploying jet-powered Shahed kamikaze drones and maintaining critical communication links for these strikes directly from within Belarus. Zelenskyy warned Minsk becomes further integrated into the Kremlin's regional military strategy.
Оператори російських реактивних шахедів.
Russian Shahed rocket operators operate in Ukraine, including from Belarus. Communications for the strikes are maintained from Belarus. Russia is using Belarus as a testing ground for blackmailing Europe and the world with the Oreshnik missiles. Belarusian industry is fueling Russia's war effort, and trade ties help Putin buy the components he needs to threaten all of us in Europe. That's why it's crucial for Europe not to lose a single free nation. That's why it's critical for Europe not to waste time. That's why we all in Europe must work every day for a strong Europe.
The Russian Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile could reach Kyiv from Belarus in just 1 minute and 51 seconds. According to reports from Telegraph, Oreshnik has been already on combat duty within Belarusian territory, significantly shortening the warning window for neighboring states. Based on the missile's flight speed of over 12,300 kilometers per hour, calculated flight times to key cities in Lithuania, Poland, and Estonia are 1 to 2 minutes. If launched from the Kapustin Yar proving ground in Russia's southern Astrakhan region, as seen in previous strikes against Ukraine, the missile's range allows it to strike any target across Europe or the United Kingdom. Missile could reach major European capitals in as little as 11 to 16 minutes. Drones attacked the Russian town of Slavyansk-on-Kuban. The strike has set an oil refinery on fire. Local residents reported a series of powerful explosions starting at around 1:30 a.m. Kyiv time. The Krasnodar Regional Operational Headquarters confirmed drone debris had fallen on the premises of 2 industrial facilities. Residents of the Russian city of Engels have reported living without heating or hot water for 10 days. The humanitarian situation is critical, as regional temperatures have already plummeted to minus 25 degrees Celsius. Forecasters warn the cold snap will intensify, with temperatures expected to drop to minus 29 degrees in the coming days. In response, residents from several apartment buildings recorded a collective video appeal to Alexander Bastrikin, the chairman of Russia's investigative committee. According to the residents, indoor temperatures have failed to rise above 13 degrees Celsius, while hot water is either completely unavailable or barely lukewarm. Systemic infrastructure failures in Russia are now impacting critical military sites. The main base of Russia's northern fleet has been left without electricity following the collapse of power line pylons, infrastructure that had reportedly not been updated since the Soviet era. Warships have been forced to switch to emergency backup generators as the city of Murmansk entered a state of high alert. Local authorities have urged residents to conserve power amid a citywide blackout and temperatures plunging to minus 20 degrees Celsius. Even Russia's most strategic military assets no longer appear shielded from the country's deepening domestic crisis. Kremlin continues to prioritize funding its ongoing invasion of Ukraine over the basic maintenance and welfare of its own territory. Utility infrastructure failures in Russia have taken on a systemic character, according to a report from the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. Thousands of apartments and dozens of public utility enterprises have been left without electricity across the Krasnoyarsk Krai, Chelyabinsk region, and Omsk. The crisis extends to water supplies as well, with major disruptions reported in Tomsk, Kemerovo, and Rostov-on-Don. Despite the growing domestic instability, the Kremlin continues to prioritize funding for the ongoing war against Ukraine over the basic welfare and infrastructure of its own citizens. More about utility collapse in Russia in the next story for you.
For the massive shelling of Ukraine on January 20th, Russia spent the annual budget of Veliky Novgorod, calculated by the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. In one night, the aggressor country spent $131 million on strike drones, ballistic, hypersonic, and cruise missiles, all to deprive Ukrainians of heat and light.
For comparison, these funds are enough for the city of Veliky Novgorod, with a population of about 220,000 people, to live for a whole year. This is also comparable to 1/3 of the annual budget of entire Russian regions, Kalmykia and the Nenets Autonomous Okrug. With such an amount, it would be possible to build a modern, fully equipped oncology center capable of saving thousands of lives. In addition, these funds would be sufficient to implement hundreds of regional and national social projects. From a message by the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine on Facebook.
Russia closed 2025 with a budget deficit of 5.5 trillion rubles, record budget holes in most Russian regions. The most serious shortage of funds is in Kemerovo and Irkutsk regions, as well as in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug. Local authorities are cutting payments to contract soldiers, delaying salaries, and freezing construction and repairs of municipal facilities.
For the sake of war, they have completely abandoned, in fact, already closed, the program for reconstruction of dilapidated and emergency housing. That is, those Russians who lived in collapsing houses will continue to live in collapsing houses, because all the money is needed by Putin for the war. So where will he take it from? Of course, from the pockets of the Russians themselves, and not his super-rich friends, but from the pockets of poor Russians, so that they become even poorer and turn into paupers.
Degradation of infrastructure leads to frequent utility accidents. Breakdowns are systematic, note the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. Settlements in Krasnoyarsk Krai were left without electricity in 30-degree frosts. Thousands of apartments and dozens of utility enterprises without electricity in Chelyabinsk region and Omsk. Pipe bursts and heating outages are an even more widespread problem.
In Kemerovo, a cold water pipe burst flooded one of the city's main thoroughfares, paralyzing transport and threatening residents. In Tomsk, due to a water supply burst, 632 houses were left without cold water. Houses in Novosibirsk are literally sinking. Flooded entrances, storerooms, and parking lots have become the norm for residents living in dilapidated networks. In Zheleznogorsk, Kursk region, almost 150 houses were left without heating due to a heating network burst. 146 of them multi-apartment buildings. 18 social facilities were also disconnected. Rostov-on-Don is again suffering from a pipeline burst, from a publication on the website of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
And there is less and less money in the Russian treasury. The aggressor country's oil and gas revenues are falling due to international sanctions and declining market prices. But for Moscow, the priority remains continuing the war against Ukraine. At least 13 trillion rubles are planned for this in 2026. Social budget items will again be cut.
This underfunding of regions, the inability to patch holes and carry out repairs that would allow sufficiently outdated infrastructure to hold on, will lead to new problems. And it is unclear what will happen next. The state will not have the opportunity to control its normal functioning because the funds needed for this will be sent to conduct, as they say, the special military operation.
The Kremlin is systematically increasing taxes, excise duties, and fines, which leads to rising prices for goods and accelerating inflation. The large-scale campaign to confiscate assets is not helping either. In 2025, assets worth 1,120 billion rubles were seized in Russia. However, high enterprise debt and declining profitability in civilian sectors of the economy are holding back potential buyers. Thus, recently at the auction for the sale of Moscow's Domodedovo airport, not a single qualified bid was received. The government expected to receive at least 132 billion rubles from the airport sale, reported by Andriy Dmitrenko, UATV News.
That's all for today's News Digest. Stay informed, stay critical, like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.